All right. So let's go ahead and start our discussion about policies. And before I drill down into the actual bills that we're going to be looking at today, just wanted to give you a little bit of backstory. So when I was in high school, even though I shared in my testimonial earlier that I had a really difficult upbringing, secretly, because I was remember I said I was a disruptor, I was like super argumentative and growing up, and I was always like, but that doesn't make sense, but why that? So I was always sort of leaning towards like a legal bend, you know, wanting to understand the rules and why. So it turns out that actually has worked in my favor in the area of human trafficking, because there's a lot going on, guys. Being inquisitive, analytical, and asking why are just super, super important right now in our state. There's a lot of things that are going on that we don't know are happening right under our noses, and it's really, really scary. I want to tell you that I am not an attorney, and I am a 501c3. I have the right as a 501c3 to advocate. I do not have the right to lobby. So there's an interesting little barrier there as a 501c3. So I am advocating right now for the rights and the voices of survivors of human trafficking and vulnerable children that are in our communities, that are in our state. And I'm just going to share with you a couple of the bills. There are tons of bills out there that I'm happy to share out with you, and that relate to human trafficking or have implications to human trafficking. So I'm going to start us off with, if we want to go to that first slide. Oh, and I shared with you what our mission is, so I'm not going to drill down too much more into that. But let's start with this bill. So how many of you knew that, how many of you know what the 290 Sex Registrant is? Anybody know what that database is? 290 Sex, so 290 is a penal code, okay? So this penal code has been in place, and many similar types of codes have been in place since the 40s to kind of designate when someone would be considered a sex offender and what kind of behaviors warrant being labeled as a sex offender. And it's very graphic penal code. Penal code are the codes that all of our laws, so when a police officer arrests somebody, there's a penal code associated with whatever they're charging to that particular individual. And the district attorney, interesting, the way the system works is that code is what gives the law enforcement officer the right to arrest a person, and then the district attorney will determine whether that code is important to the DA or the ADA, the assistant district attorney, and whether they're going to charge the person. So just note, the arrest is one part, the DA actually pursues the charging of that penal code. And so there's two components there in the legal process. And then you go in front of a judge, and the judge determines whether you actually did that crime, which is outlined in the penal code, and you pay the price, whatever is written into the code, okay? So, and many of these codes are actually they're being altered, right, through bills. So how many of you can say that you know how to create an assembly bill or a Senate bill? Anybody? Okay. So there's a group of folks that are our senators. Who's our senator for this county? Anybody know? Who is it? Medea? Padua, right? Or Padilla? Okay. Padilla. Okay. So I didn't check. So I'll have to look because there's a long list of them. I'll look for us, okay, so that we know who is the senator for this area and then who is the assembly member for this area? Anybody know? Harder. Okay. So I should have checked that. Sorry, that was a bad move. I should have checked that. So I will get that for you because we should know that here. So these are people that you want to make sure you know how to contact their office, go to their websites, and feel free. They work for you. They're paid by your tax dollars. You can ask them questions. You can set up meetings with them, and you can advocate for things that are of concern to you. What happens is assembly members and senators, they have a list of things that they're interested, bills that they're interested in changing and are creating. And those bills will either introduce new penal codes or new laws, or they'll alter existing laws, existing penal codes. And so there is a particular senator that is based out of San Francisco that has spearheaded a bunch of bills related to basically child endangerment, sexual abuse of children, human trafficking, and drug use, quite frankly. Senator Wiener, Scott Wiener. And he's a very progressive senator. And when I say progressive, I don't mean that in a good way, not in my opinion. He's sort of off the charts. In fact, a lot of people that are in the Democratic space have said, we want there to be a third party because it's so far out there, some of the things that he's introducing. However, what's happening is because there is this split between Democratic and Republican, and just this, like if a Republican introduces that, then all the Democrats are not going to vote for it, and there's no one looking into the actual bill. They're just saying, who introduced it? Oh, Republican? Well, I'm a Democrat? No. And then, oh, who introduced it? Democrat? I'm a Republican? No. And it's like, come on, guys, we got to start looking at what these bills are and what's in there and how they're going to impact the people, and start really stop doing the party thing, right? And so this one is SB 384, introduced by Scott Wiener. It was introduced in 2020. It went into law January 1st, 2021, signed by the governor. It introduced the tiering of the 290 Sex Registrant Database. So prior to this, anyone who was convicted of sexual abuse of a child or rape, sexual assault against an adult would be labeled a 290 Sex Registrant, which basically was a lifetime designation. And it made them have to disclose wherever they were living, and they would be listed in the Megan's Law database throughout the state. And they would only be able to live a certain amount of certain distance away from schools. And so there was this kind of neighborhood watch component to all 290 sex registrants. There were 41,655 registered sex offenders at the time when this tiering was introduced. What they introduced there is that there would be a tier 1 would be a 10-year placement on the registry. Tier 2 would be a 20-year, and tier 3 would be a lifetime placement on the registry. Let me tell you what you had to do to get in one of these categories. So tier 2 is a misdemeanor sexual battery. So and I'm sorry, I'm going to be very graphic. That these bills are graphic. So if it troubles you, if it triggers you, please get some water, please take a walk, please take some deep breaths. I should have said that earlier when I was speaking. I always like to give the trigger warning before I talk. But if somebody is touching someone's genitals but they don't penetrate them, then they would be considered a tier 1 offender. If they have 599 pictures of a child pornography, then they would be tier 1. But if they had 600, they would be tier 2. if they did indecent exposure to a child or to an adult, then they would be tier 1. Tier 2 is something that's called lewd acts, where if you had sodomy with a minor under 14, or incest or oral copulation with a child, so that's an actual physical act, then this is not an all-inclusive list. So you'd have to look at the code to actually see like every little thing, but I tried to summarize it for you in the interest of time. It's basically if you actually touched a child and had sex with a child or did oral copulation, then you would get a tier 2 designation, which would be 20 years on the registered sex offenders list. You only get life if you actually rape them with violence, meaning by gunpoint, or you kidnap, or you force them into sex acts, and certain forms of human trafficking, and then felony possession of porn. Sorry, so it jumps from if you have 600 porn pictures, sorry, then you're tier 3. So you have 600 and above. Then you go tier 3. So I don't know where all this logic came from, but in essence, when I talked to the district attorneys who wrote this in partnership with Senator Weiner, they said the reason that they did this is because the database had become unmanageable. And it was no longer working in the favor of law enforcement as a tool to actually do anything about someone being a sex offender, meaning the designation didn't really mean anything. But as I argued, but it notified parents when there was somebody who had these behaviors living in their neighborhood. It allowed us the visibility to be able to know that somebody is having this behavior. Moreover, why didn't we just introduce something that was a healing component to the registered sex offenders, like some kind of counseling or some kind of restorative program? If it wasn't working, we see that the database keeps growing and more people keep getting more and more convicted of these crimes. We got to reassess what our community is about. We saw it from the main stage when, or actually in here in the breakout last time, it's like some of the imagery, some of the magazines, the way that the digital media is pushing sex every step, and TikTok and the Instagram and the the OnlyFans and the Pornhub and all the different websites, and so maybe we should look at that, instead of opening it up, which is what you've done. Maybe we should look at some other ways to address this. But this law this was voted yes and went into law in January of 2021. So I wanted you to be aware of that, because on the heels of this, and this is the part that is most disturbing to me, and I'm very disturbed by this too, because most of the children that are being abused in this way come from low-income, underserved, under-resourced families, and many of them trafficked. So trafficking is interlinked in here, okay? So let's go to the next slide, which is SB 145. Did y'all hear about that? Okay, so SB 145, it passed in August of 2021, and it went into law in January of this year. And it has now made it legal for a 14-year-old to consent to sex, as long as the person is 10 years from their age. 15-year-old can consent to sex with 25 and below. 17-year-old with 27 and below. It's called the Romeo and Juliet clause. Okay, so I'm going to tell you how they got this passed, because this is something that is a strategy that I want everybody to be up on, okay? So, as you know, there's a lot of advocacy going on for LGBTQ+, and I'm a huge supporter of LGBTQ+, to be safe, to not be picked on, to not be, abused in any way. However, what they have done is they've pitted the majority of the people that are being hurt in these ways against LGBTQ, and basically made LGBTQ+ the safety of LGBTQ plus the narrative in order to pass laws that are making a ton of other children unsafe. Let me explain. So, the way this bill was sold was that the penal code that is used, the 290 penal code, sex registration penal code, has some code in it so that you can avoid getting on the 290 sex registration database if you go through something that's called statutory rape. If you go through that pathway, it allows you to bypass being a 290 sex registrant. But in the language, it only says vaginal sex is the only thing that qualifies you to bypass 290 sex registration. Does not include oral copulation and does not include sodomy. So they sold this as a discriminatory code against gay and lesbians because it doesn't have a bypass for sodomy or oral copulation. I pushed back on that and said, guys, news update, heterosexual people do sodomy and oral copulation too. So it wasn't on purpose to be discriminatory against LGBTQ. What you have here is code that was written in the 40s when that was not allowed. You only did it missionary and you didn't do anything else. Okay, so it wasn't like, oh, we're gonna go against the gay people or the lesbian. No, it was, oh my gosh, we would never do that. And it's in 1942 or is when this code was created. So I asked the people who wrote this code, which is Senator Weiner and Orange County District Attorney and a couple of other, ACLU was part of this. I asked them, why didn't you just revise the code so that it included oral copulation and sodomy as exceptions so that scenarios such as the main scenario that they used to sell this. Let me tell you what they used to sell this. They got a girl who was 17 years old who connected with an 18-year-old, and they were both a lesbian couple, and they were both going to UCLA, or the older girl was going to UCLA, and she had a full scholarship. They were in what the older girl felt was a consensual sexual relationship. The parents didn't feel that it was consensual, and their child was 17. So their child said, I want this is a predator, she's preying against my daughter, and I want her to be a registered sex offender. And because the parents pushed the envelope and there was no loophole with the statutory rape because they're doing oral sex, because of that, she was, that young lady, the 18-year-old, lost her scholarship to UCLA. And she was put in jail. And she was highly penalized for what she felt was a consensual relationship. And she felt like she should have had the ability to get the workaround that you can get with the everybody tracking with me? Am I making sense? Okay. So Senator Weiner used that to build his whole campaign on, and they tested this bill against 7 cases. 7. Out of 41,600 some odd cases, they tested it against 7 cases. I asked them, did you test it against human trafficking cases? Here's why. A 14-year-old who's being exploited, if the police come to her and they break into the motel room and they see her in the bed and she's in the bed with a 24-year-old, they're going to say, hey, do you know him? And she's going to say, that's my man. That's my boyfriend. Why? Because she's being controlled. So she's going to say, this is my boyfriend. I consented to this. This is part of what is being taught. You're 15, you're laying in the bed with somebody who's 18, 19, 21. I consented. So guess what's going to happen? Law enforcement is going to put their hands together, throw their hands up and go, I'm not going to even bother. Every time I try to get involved with CSEC, commercially sexually exploited children, there's all these loopholes, there's all these barriers. I can never get the guys away from them, and they're going to just throw their hands up and they're going to give up because there's too much red tape to be able to help them and support them. And unless you have, like I met an officer who spoke in one of the breakouts in the other room, unless you have someone like him who's tenacious, who's after it, who's really serious about it, most of them are going to go, no, if I see a little kid who's being trafficked, whatever. Sorry to say, this is the reality of it. And it's this kind of ridiculousness that we just passed that has enabled that. And it was because it was sold as a LGBTQ plus, anti-LGBTQ discriminatory code. So everybody go, no, I don't want to discriminate against LGBTQ plus, so I'm going to vote for it because I don't want to be discriminatory. But no, we got to start looking under the covers here. There were only 7 cases it was tested against. This messed up all those thousands of other kids. And it will continue to mess them up. And there was no forethought put into trafficking victims or CSEC when this bill was created. In fact, this bill is going to provide the general public access to young bodies now. A whole strategy can be developed around this. Because now, anybody who's between the ages of 14 and up is free game. So this is very disturbing. Next slide. So, Senator Wiener, last year, 2021, he introduces SB 519. This is legalizing hard drugs. This bill legalizes the personal use of date rape drugs, ketamine, Molly, LSD, ecstasy. Why? Because there are clinicians that are doing studies right now that in a controlled setting using psychedelics, they're seeing some people actually get healed from PTSD and some deep levels of mental health, like schizophrenia, using some of these psychedelics. So what do? They take that, which any clinician will tell you, the trials that they've been doing are under medical care in a hospital where you're not giving someone LSD on a street corner in San Francisco in the middle of the Tenderloin and saying, I hope you get healed of PTSD. No. You're in a room with them and you're administering medication with someone managing it. And so what they have done is they've taken the narrative of healing PTSD, and they said we're no longer going to charge people for having personal possession of these substances on them. We'll make it legal. Okay, and this one got tabled. It didn't get taken off. It didn't get canceled. It got tabled because it didn't have enough support. I'm sure he will be back with this one. So keep your eye on this. Did you know that these drugs were already legal in Oregon? Okay. They're already legal in Oregon. And let me tell you, if you look at the articles, because it was legalized last year, there are all kinds of problems that are going to start showing their ugly head because it was legalized before they had any infrastructure in place to support people to get off of the drugs. So you legalized these drugs and said you can pay $100 fine for using, but you don't give them any facility where they can go and get off of it. So they're finding that people are dying a slow death because it's legalized. There's a lot of weird stuff going on here, guys. Are you guys seeing this? Date rape drugs? Really? Legalizing? And then go to the next slide. And this is the one that I'm working on most currently, and that's SB 357. Interestingly, this was introduced last year. It passed the Assembly on July the 13th, and then the Senate floor in June of last year. And it actually should have been presented to the governor because it passed by one vote in their last Assembly meeting. But I don't know what happened, but it wasn't presented to the governor's office. Thank God. Senator Wiener keeps saying he's going to present it, he's going to present it. We currently have 1,600 signatures on a kind of a form saying we want this this vetoed if it gets put in front of the senator's office, in front of the governor's office. We had the opportunity to bring survivors in front of the governor a couple weeks ago, his office, and make a plea for this to be canceled. And what this does, again, here's this narrative again. What Senator Weiner, also Weiner, what he and the ACLU and, all these different assembly members and senators who signed on to this, as well as some nonprofits also signed on to this, interestingly. One nonprofit that's supposed to be an anti-trafficking nonprofit in Southern California signed on. You know why they signed on? Because they've gotten grants for millions of dollars to provide services as an alternative to law enforcement in their county. And I pushed back on them and said, that's great for you. And if I got $1 million, for doing exit services in my county, I would be like, oh, well, I don't need law enforcement as much here because I've got something that I can offer as an alternative. But I still would be sensitive to the fact that the other counties, 58 counties in our state, don't have such money and don't have such resources. I would never advocate for something that was going to make, people in San Francisco County safe, but make people in Fresno County unsafe. We have to start thinking bigger picture. We're a community. We got to care about all survivors, no matter where they're at. And what this does, it's the first step towards decriminalization of prostitution. They will tell you it's not. It is. What they have done, let me tell you the narrative. The narrative is that because there is such an anti-police sentiment right now, the narrative is the police are harassing innocent Black and Latino women and LGBTQ that are just walking in their community, not being exploited. And they're coming and arresting them for loitering for the purpose of prostitution without cause. So that's what the narrative says. So they're saying that there are people that are in like, let's say a city, let's say somewhere, let's say they're in Modesto, and they're walking around, and because of what they're wearing or whatever, you might assume that they're being exploited, but they're really not. They're just walking around. So why are they being arrested? But the way that this code, it's 653.22, the way this code works is the police officer, in order to issue the citation or the arrest, I don't even know if they arrest for this anymore. I think they just do citations. But in order for them to do something, they have to observe not just walking around in maybe short skirts or low-cut blouses, but they have to be soliciting, waving down a car, hanging out of a window, and exchanging details about a number. Okay? And so what they're saying is, I'm just waving at a friend. I'm just hanging out of a car of my friend, and I'm getting jammed up by the popo. And I'm saying, no, it's not. The reason why the Black and Latino women are disproportionately represented on arrest records is because Black and Latino women are disproportionately exploited, because Black and Latino women are disproportionately impoverished and disproportionately undereducated and disproportionately unhoused and disproportionately abused, and so on and so forth, all the markers of being easy prey for exploitation. Instead of making up false narratives, we should be making up services that we can offer to those communities so they don't have to go in that direction and be exploited. And so this bill, what it did was it built a whole narrative around anti-police and not wanting the police to ever have access to Black and brown, not wanting the police to ever have access to LGBTQ, so let's remove the police altogether. If this bill goes into law, the exploiters are so excited about it, because now this bill, 653.22, this code, it actually is used to arrest buyers and exploiters too. So they won't get arrested, and the girls won't get arrested. Now, we've introduced a separate bill. If you go to the next slide, we've introduced a separate bill Love Never Fails and some survivor leaders have come together to create something that's called Pathway to Safety. I want to encourage you to go to that website and to explore it. What it does is it addresses all the gaps that SB 357 has, and it provides built-in exit strategies. So if I encounter somebody and I'm law enforcement and I encounter a person that's being exploited, instead of arresting them, I give them a referral for counseling. How about that? I give them a referral for housing. I give them a referral for workforce development. And not just like a resume writing, but like a robust job readiness program. I give them a referral for that. I make sure that loitering demand for sex doesn't increase in my community. You have a question? Yeah. No. But thank you. Advocacy, yes. Woohoo! But I'd love to talk to you about that later, because you can make your voices known in lots of other ways. And young people need to, if young people can consent at 14, you can be out there saying, hey, not cool. Not cool. This is going to make my sisters out here unsafe. So, and then the last thing is in neighborhoods. I was talking with somebody off of Figueroa who works Figueroa in SoCal, and she said that one of the community members came outside and had her grandson playing around there, granddaughter, and she swallowed a condom. Well, if you're allowing loitering for the purpose of prostitution in a neighborhood, and these are residential districts, this is not commercial districts. These are places where houses are. So you mean to tell me the lowest income areas of the community get to be the places that house loitering for the purposes of prostitution, and the people that are the most vulnerable to trafficking get to have their young babies and their young children coming out and having to cross by somebody who's in and out of cars? I was in Oakland a few months ago. There's 20 girls lined up, cars lined up all the way down the street waiting, taking their pick who they want. And this is right where there's a neighborhood right there. Somebody's coming out, they're pushing their laundry to go to the laundry house. Like, why should they be subjected to that? And might sound crude, but I even thought about, hey, let's pack up a bunch of people and let's go to some of these more affluent neighborhoods. And let's stand around and let's drop some condoms and let's get over here in the corner somewhere and do this and do that. And let's see how quickly, how quickly this junk gets shut down. This is not right. Just because they're impoverished, they're living in poverty, they should just be left to, what? Deal with something that nobody would want to deal with? Never mind the fact that the people who are there are being exploited and they don't want to be there. It's not, it's not this great empowering act that a lot of people are building it up to be. So we really want to get people to sign this bill. So please share out the website. It has a little form on it that you can sign, and you can share it on your social media and so on and so forth. So I have some time. I have about 15 minutes for questions. I know I've given you a lot. Did you guys know this stuff? Okay. All right. It's kind of sad.